Good day. My name is Nanise Kalomaira, and I am presenting on the topic Cyber Terrorism as a Catalyst to Cyber Warfare, the Future Landscape. This is the presentation assignment for ZEIT8035 Cyber Terrorism. Firstly, I would like to begin with a definition of the term terrorism. Defined as violence intended to intimidate and conducted by non-state actors. Denning defined cyberterrorism as the convergence of terrorism and cyberspace. It involves unlawful attacks and threats of attack against computers, networks, and the information stored therein, done to intimidate or coerce a government or its people in the advancement of political or social objectives. Attack should result in violence against persons or property, or at least cause enough harm to generate fear. Dr. Thomas Reid, a reader at the Department of War Studies at King's College London, defines cyberterrorism as cyber sabotage, that is, using computer code to attack targets. Some scholars and academics believe they have never seen an act of cyberterrorism, while others argue not. Now allow me to digress to the definition of the term war, defined as violence intended to intimidate and conducted by states against other states. Cyber warfare, then, is pertinently defined as state-orchestrated computer network attacks against other states. It is an emerging phenomenon in international relations and increasing in frequency and scale. Let's take a look at the worldwide threat assessment to see where cyber fits in. In 2007, there was no mention of cyber threats in the worldwide threat assessment. In 2011, cyber threat appears at the end behind the West African drug trafficking. In 2012, cyber threat appeared behind terrorism and proliferation. Since 2013, cyber threat appeared as the top threat in the worldwide threat assessment. Allow me to briefly walk you through a few of cyber warfare since 2007. In 2007, there was a cyber warfare between Russia and Estonia. The Russian and Estonian cyber war saw a 3-week wave of cyber attacks. The attack was triggered by the relocation of the Soviet World War II memorial by the Estonian on the 27th of April. The ethnic Russian Estonians staged protests against the removal of the memorial. The war resulted in 1,300 people arrested, 100 were injured, and 1 death. Russians attempted to impede the functioning of Estonians' digital infrastructure via cyber attacks, primarily executed as distributed denial-of-service attacks. The attacks also targeted the websites of the President, the Prime Minister, Parliament, other government agencies, banks, and daily newspapers. However, no attacks were made against infrastructures that regulate electricity, finance, energy, or traffic. The Estonians argued that the Internet address involved in the attacks belonged to an official working in the administration of Russia's President, Vladimir Putin, but the Russian government denied a role in the attacks. The war between Russia and Georgia in 2008. This was a part of an ongoing conventional war between Georgia and Russia over 2 Georgian provinces. Attacks primarily executed as distributed denial-of-service attacks. Defacement of Georgian government websites, particularly the President's website. Cyber attacks began more than 2 weeks before the kinetic Russian invasion. As a result of the attacks, Georgian government decided to relocate the President's website to a website hosting service in Atlanta, Georgia in the United States. The idea is that Russian cyber attackers would think twice about attacking website hosts on servers located in the United States. If the Russian cyber attackers were to go after the president's website hosted in United States soil, that action might bring the United States into the conflict. This is an undesirable outcome. Cyber war between joint United States and Israel against Iran in 2012. Known as the Stuxnet worm, it targeted the Iranian nuclear development effort. The worm is an advanced persistent threat, had 4 zero-day vulnerabilities, known also to be the first virus to include code to attack supervisory, control and data acquisition or SCADA systems. In 2013, Russia and the European Union, NATO and Germany, the attack known as Red October, investing in military and diplomatic espionage. Perpetrators appear to have had access to the keys for major cryptography systems employed as protection by the European Union, NATO, and the German government. Also in 2013, between North Korea and South Korea, known as the Daxiol malware, the malware attacks on computer systems and paralyzed banks and television stations. Again in 2013, between the Chinese People's Liberation Army and the United States, there were cyber attacks on the New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal. Investing in cyber espionage, commercial, industrial, and military or diplomatic. Majority of these examples are traditional cyber warfares, that is, by a nation state against another nation state. However, nation states such as China and Russia will look at asymmetric techniques, including potentially cultivating criminal networks or encouraging so-called patriotic hackings in which citizens themselves wage cyber attacks. Consider the cyber attack against Sony Pictures on the 24th of November 2014 by a group of hackers known as the Guardians of Peace, or GOP. GOP was claimed to be supported by the North Korean government. The group took retaliatory action for Sony's failure to meet a previous demand to halt the release of the movie The Interview. The wiping malware was spread after being physically introduced into Sony's networks. The Trojan wiper created a link between Sony's network and the hackers, leading to the hackers stealing protected information as well as destroying data on the infected systems. As a result, yet to be released films and scripts were leaked, and employees' personal information such as social security numbers, medical records, and disclosure of salary were among the information that was stolen. In December 2014, the attack damaged the company's employees and families. It undermined the economic and social prosperity of the United States citizens, and President Obama claimed the United States would respond proportionally against the attacks, and in particular against the North Korean government. So when does a cyber attack constitute an act of war? The United States Department of Defense is yet to determine when to respond to a cyber attack on civilian infrastructure. In 2011, according to a Department of Defense official of the United States, the White House and Pentagon declared that acts such as shutting down the U.S. power grid via a cyber attack could be seen as an act of war that would bring more than a cyber response. When warranted, the United States will respond to hostile acts in cyberspace as they would to any other threat to their country. They reserve the right to use all necessary means, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, as appropriate and consistent with applicable international law in order to defend their nation, their allies, their partners, and their interests. Let us consider, for example, an allied group of nations infiltrating the computer systems of an enemy nation's nuclear warship. The attack results in a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier almost melting down and stopped just short of killing thousands of soldiers and civilians. The enemy country responds by unleashing a defensive cyber attack, resulting in the shutdown of allied nations' power grids, where hospitals are unable to treat patients and entire regions are left without heat or clean water, causing tens of thousands of civilian deaths. The origin of power failure was the result of the counterattack. However, fragile infrastructure, feeble cybersecurity, and the antiquated state of the power grid all contributed to the deaths of the civilians. Who is to be held responsible for this attack, for the deaths of the civilians? Will it be the allied group of nations? Would it be the enemy country? Would the retaliation of the enemy country be considered an act of war? Or is it the computer programmers who wrote the code, or the military project manager who oversaw the creation of the code? Could it be the commander who hit the button setting off the event? Or the hardware engineers who created the computers knowing that they were intended to enable an attack? Let us consider another example of whether this cyber attack constitutes an act of war. An individual working for the government used a wireless device to send a signal to another foreign leader's pacemaker that directs the pacemaker to malfunction, resulting in the foreign leader's death. Would this attack be considered an act of cyber war? I believe this last example that I've shared typifies the future cyber warfare landscape, where an act of cyber terrorism by an individual can trigger a response that leads to a cyber warfare. And thank you for listening.